In the territorial scrolls of the Wolf Council, locked behind the seal of the Blood Moon Gathering, and marked classified by order of the High Elder, there is a story the 7 packs agreed never to repeat. Not because it was shameful, because it was true, and in the world of wolves, where power is currency, beauty is a bargaining chip, and bloodlines are traded like land, the truth is often the most dangerous thing of all. This is that story. It begins in the Ashbourne Pack's crumbling estate in the Ironvale territory. It begins with a mother who had 2 daughters, and saw one as a treasure and the other as a tool. It begins with debts that had swallowed the family name whole, and a desperate gamble dressed up in silk and perfume, and a carefully worded letter sent north to the most powerful wolf in all 7 territories. It begins, as all truly important stories begin, not with the people standing in the firelight, but with the one kneeling in the dark, doing the work that would never be credited to her name. While every wolf in 7 territories came to admire the she-wolf shining at the center of the great hall, the Alpha King was already walking toward the one hiding in the shadows, and he did not even know her name yet. Listen closely, because what follows was buried on purpose, and some truths deserve to be spoken out loud. The Ironvale Pack House woke slowly in the grey light of early morning. The fires needed stoking. The younger wolves needed their training assignments before the elders arrived, and somewhere in the back room, a merchant's debt notice was waiting to be answered before Kalira Ashbourne read it, and made a scene that would shatter the morning's thin peace before it had a chance to settle. Freya Ashbourne was already awake. She was always already awake. She moved through the pack house like water, quiet, purposeful, filling the spaces that needed filling without drawing attention to itself. She was 23 years old. She had been moving this way since she was 16, since her father's health began its slow, quiet surrender, and the reality of the Ashbourne finances revealed itself like a wound that had been bleeding beneath the bandages for years. There was the account ledger tucked under her arm, its spine worn smooth from handling, its pages dense with her small, careful handwriting. But there was the ink on her right hand, the stain along her middle finger that she scrubbed every morning, and that returned faithfully by noon. There was her dress, dark wool, practical, mended at the hem twice over, chosen because it did not show dirt, and because nobody was looking at Freya anyway. She paused at the window of the records room and looked out over the Ironvale territory, the land her grandfather had once ruled with a proud, thick bloodline. Now it was half mortgaged to southern merchants who extended courtesy because the Ashbourne name still carried a faint echo of its former resonance, and because Kalira had been promising an alliance that would make them all whole again. That alliance was arriving today. Freya turned away from the window. She opened the merchant's debt notice, read the number in silence, and wrote a careful response that asked for 30 more days. She used the formal council language she had taught herself from old correspondence scrolls in the archive room. She made the 30 days sound like a reasonable request from a family in good standing, not a last gasping reach from a house already half underwater. She sealed it. She set it aside for the morning courier. She picked up the ledger and went to find what else needed doing. She was hanging the ceremonial hall banners, the ones Kalira wanted displayed for the Alpha King's arrival, when she heard her mother's voice drifting sharp and clear down the corridor. "Elena, stand in the light of the east window when he enters. The light is good there. It catches your hair." Freya paused on the step stool. She did not turn around. Elena's voice floated back, soft and a little uncertain. "What if he asks me something I don't know? Something complicated?" "Then you smile," Kalira said. A smile from a face like yours is an answer to any question. Freya climbed down from the step stool. She smoothed the banner. She walked to the doorway. He has been running 7 territories for 4 years, she said quietly. He will ask something complicated. He asks difficult questions of everyone. I have read 3 of his council addresses. Kalira turned slowly. The look she gave Freya was not anger. It was something colder than anger. It was the particular expression of someone looking at a piece of furniture that has developed the inconvenient habit of speaking. Go to the records room, her mother said. Elder Ulrich is coming to review the boundary maps before the formal greeting. Have them organized, and stay there until the Alpha King has settled in. And I will not have him thinking we use family members for council work, because we cannot afford proper staff. Freya looked at her mother's face for a long moment. Then she looked at Elena, her younger sister in all her morning golden loveliness, hovering at the edge of the room like a beautiful question mark, blinking slowly, absorbing almost nothing. She picked up her ledger. She went to the records room. The records room was cold and mostly forgotten. Shelves of territorial maps, the old wolf law scrolls, and correspondence going back 4 generations. Dust settled on everything with the particular contentment of things that had not been disturbed in too long. It was Freya's favorite room in the pack house. It was the only room in the building where no one came to ask her for anything. She spread the boundary maps on the oak table the way Elder Alric preferred. Eastern territories first, northern disputes marked in red, water rights in blue. Then, what because she had 20 minutes before anyone arrived and could not help herself, she opened the scroll she had been reading for 3 days, Alpha King Elian Wolfmere's address to the High Wolf Council on the reform of she-wolf inheritance rights. She had read it 4 times already. The margins of her private journal held 3 pages of response arguments in her small, dense handwriting. Counterpoints, supporting evidence, or the 2 places where his logic was weakest, and the one place where it was so precisely right that she had drawn a small circle around it, just to mark the moment. She would never say any of it to anyone. She traced one of the lines of text with her finger, careful not to smudge the ink. He understands the problem, she murmured to the empty room. He just hasn't seen the full shape of it yet. The distant sound of the pack-house doors opening reached her through the walls. A murmur of formal voices, the specific quality of silence that settles over a room when someone very powerful has just walked into it. He was here. Freya closed the scroll. She organized the boundary maps into precise order. She opened her ledger to the debt column and picked up her pen. She did not go to the window. She got back to work. The records room shared a thin wall with the formal receiving hall, and Freya had spent enough mornings in here to know that she could hear everything said on the other side of it, if the voices carried with any strength. Elian Wolfmere's voice carried. It was deep and unhurried, not loud, but present in a way that did not require volume. The voice of a man who had never needed to raise it to be heard. She listened to him exchange formal greetings with her mother. Courteous, measured, the words of someone completing a necessary ritual efficiently. She heard Elena's practiced welcome, soft and melodic and perfectly empty. She heard the brief silence that followed. Then, your pack's eastern boundary dispute with the Thornfell territory. Your mother's letter outlined your position. I found the argument for the shared grazing rights unusually well structured. I would be interested in your thoughts on the water access provisions specifically. A pause, long enough to press against the walls. Elena's voice came back small and uncertain. Like the provisions? Freya closed her eyes. She had written that letter. She had argued for the shared grazing rights. She had spent 4 hours on the water access section, because it was the weakest part of the Ashbourne position, and she had known it needed the most support. She had cited 3 precedents from the old wolf law scrolls in the archive, and had restructured the argument twice before she was satisfied with it. She heard Kalira redirect the conversation smoothly, or her voice brightening. She heard Elena laugh, the beautiful musical laugh that required no intelligence and landed perfectly every time, the laugh that made people feel that whatever had just gone awkward was simply delightful after all. She heard Elian go quiet. It was a specific kind of quiet, not the quiet of a man satisfied, the quiet of a man filing something away. Freya opened her eyes. She pressed the point of her pen to the debt column. She wrote the number she had been avoiding for 2 weeks, circled it precisely, and stared at it. Then the evening came, and with it a sealed scroll from the Alpha King's delegation, addressed to Elena. Inside was a complex territorial analysis with a request for her thoughts. A line at the bottom read, "I find myself curious whether your mind is as structured on paper as it proved in conversation." Kalira read it. Then she looked at Freya with an expression that held no apology whatsoever, no, not even the pretense of one. "You will write her response. Tonight. Before dawn." Freya looked at the scroll, at the handwriting, precise, formal, with no wasted strokes, at the complexity of the question, the kind of question she had opinions about that she had never once been asked to share. She took the scroll. She told herself she was doing it for the family, for the debts, for the pack. She kept telling herself this for the next 3 hours, or sitting alone at the records room desk under a single candle, writing the most honest and passionate response she had ever put to parchment. Every word was true. Every argument was hers. She signed it with Elena's name. She blew out the candle and sat for a moment in the dark, her hand resting on the sealed scroll. Outside, the Iron Vale territory stretched silent and cold under a quarter moon. Somewhere to the north, in the guest wing of the pack house, as the Alpha King was probably already asleep. She wondered if he would be impressed. Then she stopped wondering, because wondering was a door she could not afford to open. She went to bed. The Silver Moon gathering lasted 3 nights, and on the 2nd night, something happened that no one planned for. The great hall was full of celebration, torches, music, the layered noise of dozens of wolves gathered in the Ashbourne Hall for the seasonal ritual that predated any of their bloodlines. Orselina stood at the center of it in her ceremonial gown, radiant and slightly bewildered, fielding compliments with the graceful vacancy of someone fluent in being looked at. Elian Wolfmare spent exactly 40 minutes in the Great Hall. Then he slipped out. He always slipped out of celebrations. The noise of performance exhausted him in a way that no territorial crisis ever had. He had discovered, over 4 years of running 7 packs, that he could think with tremendous clarity in libraries and archive rooms, and any space where books were kept and people were not. He found the Ashbourne archive room through instinct, following the narrow corridor that turned away from the noise rather than toward it, pushing open the door that stood slightly ajar with a line of candlelight beneath it. He stopped in the doorway. There was a she-wolf sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open territorial maps, an apple in one hand and a quill in the other. She was talking to herself in a low, focused murmur, not anxiously, but with the specific energy of a person working through an argument they had not yet resolved. She was wearing dark wool, practical and plain. Her right hand was marked with ink. Her hair was unpinned, half fallen. He stood there for 10 full seconds before she noticed him. When she did, chaos. She scrambled to her feet, maps scattering in all directions, the apple rolling under the bottom shelf, but a curtsy executed with such haste it nearly sent her sideways. "I apologize. I thought the room was empty. I will leave immediately. You said the Frostvale Treaty has a foundational error," he said. He had not moved from the doorway. His voice was simply curious. "I would like to hear what you mean by that." She stopped. She looked at him. Really looked. A direct and assessing look, and he felt the odd recognition of being examined by someone who was actually seeing him, rather than the Alpha King title sitting on top of him. "The water rights clause," she said, before she had apparently decided whether to say it. "It was written assuming the Frostvale River ran north to south. It runs northwest. The entire allocation is based on a geographic error. 3 packs have been disputing territory for 80 years because someone measured wrong." He was quiet for a moment. "I have been in 12 meetings about the Frostvale dispute," he said. "No one has ever said that?" "No one checked the original survey maps," she replied. "They are on the 3rd shelf. Left side." He crossed the room. He found the map. He opened it. He went completely still. She was right. Entirely. Precisely. Demonstrably right. They talked for 40 minutes after that. Not a conversation with pauses and pleasantries. A real one. Wolf law, border economics, his reform proposals to the High Council, and the counter-arguments he had never expected anyone to identify. She identified everyone. She disagreed with 2 of his positions, and she said so directly, with evidence, without the slight backward lean that most wolves employed when contradicting him. "The inheritance reform is sound in intent, but narrow in scope," she said, kneeling to retrieve the survey map from where he had set it on the floor. "You are addressing the symptom. The law that created the inheritance gap in the first place is still intact." "Which law?" "The 70th Council provision. 2nd clause. It predates every reform proposal on the table by 60 years. Every inheritance case routes through it first and loses there before it ever reaches the newer law." He stared at her. "How do you know the 70th Council provision?" "I read it," she said simply. "It was on the 4th shelf." He almost laughed. He could not remember the last time he had almost laughed at something a she-wolf said to him in a council-adjacent context. He tried to remember her name and realized he had not caught it when she came flying to her feet earlier. Before he could ask, Lord Elder Alric's voice sounded in the corridor outside, loud, advancing, or the blustering sound of an elder who expected rooms to be empty when he needed them. Her face changed immediately. "I have to go. Wait, what is your name?" She was already moving. There was a narrow door in the back wall, disguised in the paneling, almost invisible, that she clearly knew about and he had not noticed at all. She went through it and was gone in 2 heartbeats. Elian stood in the empty archive room, the survey map still open in his hands, but the air still carried the faint smell of candle wax and pine resin, and something he could not name, but was already, quietly, looking for. He went back to the celebration. He stood in the doorway of the great hall and looked at the crowd with the focused attention of a predator who has picked up a trail. He was looking for ink on a woman's right hand. He did not find her that night. But he remembered the map, or he remembered the way she had said, "I read it with the particular tone of someone who found the answer too obvious to be interesting." He remembered that too. The scroll exchanges began the morning after the archive room meeting, and the first letter Freya signed with Elena's name felt like holding a live flame with bare hands. She wrote his response to the territorial analysis, the honest one, the one that actually engaged with the eastern border question rather than sidestepping it. She argued for a dual territory water access agreement and cited 2 wolf law precedents she pulled from the archive that afternoon. The letter was clear, direct, and carried the specific energy of a mind that had been thinking about this problem for years. She sealed it with the Ashbourne family's wax stamp, the family's mark, not her own, and handed it to the morning courier with a steadiness she didn't feel. 3 days later, another scroll arrived. This one was more complex. A philosophical question wrapped around a policy problem. What did she believe was the true purpose of the Wolf Council's territorial authority? Was it to preserve existing pack structures or to serve the individuals within them? Freya sat with the scroll for an hour before she wrote a word. Not because she did not know the answer, because she knew it too precisely and too personally, and because every word she wrote was going to be exactly, entirely true. She believed the Council had lost its purpose. She believed it had become a machine for protecting the powerful from accountability rather than a system for ordering justice. She believed that the old laws that silenced she-wolves in council chambers were not traditions. They were injuries that the system had decided to call customs so they did not have to be treated as wrongs. She wrote all of it, in Elena's name, but in Elena's handwriting. She had practiced it years ago when handling the family correspondence, and by now the mimicry was effortless. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself this while she wrote the third letter, then the fourth, then the seventh. Each night, alone by candlelight in the archive room. Each night, pouring more of herself into words that would travel north in her sister's name and be read by a man she was falling in love with the way water falls. Not all at once, but inevitably, and with no ability to go back uphill. Elena reported on her formal meetings with Elian each evening with the guileless honesty of someone who had no idea how much pain she was delivering. "He asked me what I thought about the reform proposal today," she said one evening, dropping onto the bench beside Freya with a sigh. "The one about she-wolf inheritance." "What did you say?" I told him the language was very elegant. He looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at the sky. She paused. "I think I said something wrong." Freya kept her eyes on the ledger. "He said the language is deliberately plain. He believes elegant language in law is used to hide meaning from common wolves." Elena tilted her head. "How do you know what he believes?" "I have read his council addresses," Freya said. "You read everything," Elena said, not unkindly, and went to bed. Freya sat in the silence of the empty room. She picked up the next scroll, his latest, or more complex than the one before it, as though with each exchange he was tuning the frequency of the conversation to something more precise, more specific, more demanding. She answered him for the 9th time that week in her sister's name. She was precise. She was passionate. She made an argument about pack law that made her own heart beat faster as she wrote it, because it was the truest thing she had said in years to anyone, and she was saying it to someone who would read it and think it came from Elena. She finished. She sealed the scroll. She sat in the dark for a long time. Outside, the moon was past its fullness, pulling toward the crescent that always made the Ironvale territory feel smaller to her, more enclosed, more like the walls were pressing in from every side. In her journal that night, in her own handwriting that no one would ever read, she wrote a single line: "I am falling in love in the dark with a man who does not know my name." She closed the journal. She blew out the candle. She told herself it did not matter. It mattered completely. 3 weeks into the correspondence, Elian Wolfmare stopped responding like a man who was being charmed. He started responding like a man who was hunting. The shift was subtle, just precise enough that only someone paying very close attention would have caught it. His questions changed. They became more deliberate, the kind of questions that tested rather than inquired. He began referencing specific things from their earlier exchanges with the precision of someone who had memorized them, then asking follow-up questions that required the original correspondent to have been present in their own letter. Freya noticed it on the 11th scroll. She was sitting at the archive room desk, reading his latest response, and the recognition moved through her like cold water. Slow, or settling, undeniable. He knew, or he suspected, or he was close enough that the distinction no longer mattered. She kept writing anyway. She could not stop. Every time she tried to make Elena's responses more generic, more shallow, more plausible, the pen refused. The words that came out were still hers. She was incapable of writing badly to a mind that made her want to write well. It was its own kind of trap. The council dinner was held on the fourth evening of the formal gathering. Long tables in the great hall, every elder of the Iron Vale territory present, candles in silver holders, the careful performance of a family pretending to still be exactly what it was 20 years ago. Elena sat at Elion's right hand in a gown that had been altered twice to sit more precisely on her shoulders. She was luminous. She was entirely untroubled by any of the conversation happening around her. Freya moved along the edge of the room during the ceremonial first pour, head down, efficient, invisible in the way she had perfected over years, present enough to do the work, absent enough to never be a factor in anyone's accounting of who was in the room. Elion waited until the second course was settled, and the conversation at the table had reached its comfortable, slightly dull midpoint. Then he leaned back in his chair, with the ease of a man entirely at home in any room he occupied, and said to no one in particular, "There is a passage from the ancient wolf law, the 70th Council provision, second clause, that I have been thinking about lately. It begins, 'The authority of the pack elder in territorial matters supersedes individual claim in all cases where the bloodline of the petitioner cannot be—'" He stopped there. He looked at Elena with polite expectation. The table waited. Elena's fork paused over her plate. Her eyes went the particular shade of blank that Freya recognized, the shade that meant she was reaching for something that was not there. Across the room, at the far table where the serving wolves stood between courses, Freya, 3 careful steps from the side door, head bent slightly forward, hands still, felt the passage continue in her throat before she could stop it. She pressed her lips together and mouthed the next 14 words of the ancient provision, silently, precisely, but without thinking. Word for word. She looked up. He was not looking at Elena. He was looking at the ceremonial serving basin, positioned by tradition at the room's edge, polished silver, curved, catching the candlelight from every direction. And in its curved surface, Freya's reflection looked back at him with her lips still shaped around the last word of the passage. For one fraction of a second, their reflected eyes met. She looked away. She walked out through the side door into the corridor, with the steady pace of someone who had somewhere to be. She did not run. She did not let her breath change. She did not let any of the cold terror moving through her reach her face. She turned the corner. She leaned against the cold stone wall. She let herself breathe. He had seen her. She did not know exactly what he had seen, or how much, or what he would do with it. But she knew, the way you know things in your bones before your mind has finished forming the thought, that the hunt was over. He already knew. That night, she sat at the archive room desk and stared at a blank piece of parchment for a long time. She picked up a pen. She tried to write something generic, something Elena could credibly have composed, something that did not carry her own fingerprints all over it. She wrote 8 lines. She crossed out 6. She started again, and she crossed out 4 more. On the 3rd attempt, she wrote the best letter she had written in the entire correspondence, because the one thing Freya Ashbourne had never been able to do, not once in 23 years of trying, was diminish herself in front of a mind that was paying genuine attention. She sealed it. She held the scroll in both hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of it. Then she set it in the morning courier pile and went to bed without blowing out the candle first, which was how she knew she was more unsettled than she had admitted to herself. The Grand Wolf Council masquerade announcement arrived 2 days later. Every pack in all 7 territories attending. The largest gathering of the Blood Moon season. By tradition, the occasion on which the Alpha King was expected to announce his chosen Luna. Kalira was ecstatic in a way that made Freya's chest tight. Alina was nervous in a way that made Freya feel sorry for her, which was worse. Freya was not supposed to attend. She was never supposed to attend anything. There was always something that needed managing, something that would fall apart without her steady hands keeping it together. She had stopped expecting invitations 2 years ago, and had moved directly to expecting instructions. The instruction arrived an hour before the carriages left. "You will come?" Kalira said, with the tone of someone issuing a strategic command rather than an invitation. "In case Alina needs guidance, you will wear the black ceremonial cloak. You will stay in the shadows. You will be invisible. Do you understand me, Freya? Invisible." Freya pulled on the black cloak. She tied the simple dark mask over her face. "Yes, Mother," she said. She was very good at invisible. She had been practicing for 23 years. Or the Grand Wolf Council masquerade was held in the High Council's great ceremonial hall, a fortress of ancient dark stone lit by 1,000 wolf-fire torches, warmed by the press of bodies and the roar of music that had been playing this same rhythm for 400 years. Every powerful wolf from 7 territories in formal ceremonial dress. Every mask painted. Every performance carefully maintained. Freya stood at the far edge of the room in her black cloak and kept her back to the wall. She watched Alina dance with Elian at the center of the hall. He held her with perfect formal precision, correct in every particular, present in none. Alina was smiling her beautiful smile at the space just above his shoulder. He was looking at the crowd with the particular expression of someone conducting a survey. Then he stopped. He said something quietly to Alina. Freya could not hear it from where she stood, but she saw Alina smile in response, with confused grace, as she saw him bow with immaculate courtesy, and she watched him walk away from the dance floor. He did not go toward the council elders. He did not go toward the main doors. He walked with the unhurried certainty of a wolf who knew exactly where he was going, toward the stone balcony doors that opened onto the outer terrace. Freya watched him go. She told herself to stay where she was. She was supposed to be invisible. She was supposed to be the shadow in the corner, or the useful machinery behind the curtain, the one who left no trace. She followed him. She was not sure, afterward, that she had made a decision. It felt more like something inevitable, finally stopping the pretense that it could be avoided. The stone balcony was cold and quiet, cupped in moonlight. The noise of the celebration was muffled behind the thick walls, just a vibration in the stone beneath her feet, a sense of something happening elsewhere. Out here, there was only wind and the enormous silver moon and the dark line of the forest below. Freya walked to the balustrade and stood with her face turned upward. The same moon she had written about in the 14th letter, the one where she had said that the blood moon made her feel like the world was larger than the walls she lived inside, that she had never stood under it without wondering what it looked like from the wild northern territories she had read about, but never seen. She was cold. She reached up and took off her mask, just to breathe without wool pressed against her face, just for a moment. The she-wolf in the letters described this moon. The voice came from her left. She spun around. Elian Wolfmare was standing at the far end of the terrace, his own silver mask held loosely in one hand at his side. He was watching her with the same expression she had seen in the archive room, focused, entirely present, or the look of a man for whom every other noise in the world had gone quiet. She wrote, he continued, his voice low and even, that the blood moon made her feel like the world was larger, than the walls she lived inside. Freya could not speak. Her throat had closed around every word she had ever known. He crossed the terrace slowly. He stopped 2 feet from her. "Show me your hands," he said. Your hands, Freya." Her name. Not Miss Ashbourne. Not Elena's sister. Or not the polite nothing that most people used when they acknowledged her at all. Her name, in his voice, in the dark, under the moon she had written about, in a letter she had signed with someone else's name. She raised her hands. He took her right one. He turned it over and ran his thumb slowly across the ridge of ink-hardened skin on her middle finger, the permanent mark of someone who had spent years at a writing desk. And then he looked up. "Every letter," he said. "Every argument. For the Frostvale survey maps, the water rights clause, the passage from the ancient law, the eastern border proposal. It was you. Every word. It was always you. The dam broke. I did it for my family," she said, and the words came out in a rush she could not contain. "We have debts, the territory, everything my father lost before he died. Elena is all we had left. If she could secure this alliance, it would save everything. I only wanted to help her. And I wrote the letters because Mother asked me to, because Elena could not answer your questions, and you kept asking them, and I—" "You wrote letters to make me fall in love with your sister," Eliane said. He said it quietly. But underneath the quiet, there was something that blazed with the particular heat of a fire that had been burning a long time without air. "You foolish, brilliant she-wolf." He looked at her. Really looked, not the way she had always looked at him through the barrier of a name that was not hers. "You wrote those letters to make me fall in love with you." The silence between them was the loudest thing Freya had ever heard. "That's not—" she started. "You wrote them in the dark," he said. "Alone. Long after everyone else had gone to sleep. You wrote about the moon. You wrote about wolf lore with the passion of someone who has been carrying opinions for years and has never been asked to share them. You wrote about the northern territories, places you have never been, with the longing of someone who has spent her whole life inside walls." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I cannot," he said, more quietly, "do what I want to do right now. Because you deceived me. And I understand why. But I am standing here." He turned away, looked out over the dark forest. "I am not able to make promises in this moment that I can trust myself to make clearly." He replaced his silver mask. "The courtship is ended," he said. His voice had returned to its formal register. "I will send notice to your mother before dawn. I am riding north at first light." He walked back through the balcony doors, and in the shadow of the stone archway, the narrow alcove between the balcony door and the corridor, a space so shadowed that neither of them had registered it, a figure straightened slowly. Soren Darkbriar, Wolf Council Pack Herald, or the wolf whose announcements reached every territory before the morning fire was lit. He held a small carved recording stone, the kind council scribes used to capture exact words, and his expression carried the specific satisfaction of a man who had just found exactly what he came looking for. He did not say anything. He tucked the stone into his cloak, looked once at Freya standing alone in the moonlight, and slipped away into the dark. Freya stood on the balcony alone for a long time after that. She did not cry immediately. She stood with her hands on the cold stone balustrade and looked at the forest below and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. He had known. He had been certain before he even stepped onto the balcony. Every letter she had written had been hers. All her arguments, all her passions, at all the things she had never said to anyone because no one had ever wanted to hear them. And he had read them and known they were real, and he had tracked the shape of the real mind behind them with the patience and precision of a wolf born to the hunt. He had come to find her on purpose, and she had given him a reason to leave. She looked up at the moon, the exact moon she had described in the 14th letter, the moon that made the world feel larger than the walls. Right now, as the world felt exactly the size of the mistake she had made. The announcement reached the Ashbourne pack house before the household had finished its first cup of morning tea. Freya was in the kitchen, stoking the fire because someone had to, and that someone was always her, when she heard Kalira's voice from the upper floor. Not the sharp, clipped irritation she knew how to navigate. Something else. A sound she had never heard from her mother before, the sound of a structure giving way. She ran upstairs. Kalira was standing in the corridor, holding a pack herald scroll, her face the particular shade of a woman whose most important performance has just been cancelled. Elena was already crying in the corner of the room in her morning clothes, her hands pressed over her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Freya took the scroll. Isoran Darkbriar had written it with the craft of someone who understood that the most effective scandal is one that contains mostly true things arranged in the most damaging possible order. The ghostwriting, the letters, the council dinner, the balcony, all of it, laid precisely before every wolf in 7 territories before breakfast. The language was deliberate. The framing was precise. Freya was not described as a daughter protecting her family. She was described as a shadow wolf, a schemer who had hidden behind her sister's name and her sister's face, pulling strings in the dark, manufacturing a connection through deception to claim a king she had no right to want. Puppet master without conscience, the scroll said. Freya read those 3 words twice. She set the scroll down carefully on the corridor table. You, Kalira said. The word landed like a blade. You have destroyed everything. Elena's future, this family's last chance, was every alliance, every possibility, gone. Because you could not simply do what you were told without making it about yourself. Freya looked at her mother. She thought of all the mornings she had woken before everyone else, all the debt notices answered in careful formal language, all the merchants managed, all the accounts balanced, what all the wolf law scrolls studied in the archive room by candlelight, so she could write letters that might save a family that had spent years treating her like a bookkeeping tool. You told me to write them, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Every night. You read every scroll before I sealed it. Get out of my sight, Kalira said. Go to the eastern border kennels. Do not come back to the main pack house until I say otherwise. Freya looked at Elena. Her sister was still crying, but had not looked up, had not said a word. She went to pack what she could carry. The eastern border kennel was a stone outbuilding at the far edge of the Ashbourne territory, used by the pack for wolves serving formal discipline, cold enough in the morning to see your breath, furnished with a sleeping platform, and a narrow window that let in more wind than light. Freya sat on the floor with her back against the wall. No, she had the account ledger open on her knees out of pure habit, the comfort of familiar work in an unfamiliar situation. She had a pen in her hand. The pen had no ink left. She had forgotten to refill it before she was sent out here. She set it down. From the kennel's narrow window, she could see the pack house. She watched the creditors arrive before midday. 3 merchants, 2 council fee collectors, or the man from the Southern Territory who had been extending courtesy on the promise of the Wolfmere alliance, and was now, quite reasonably, extending nothing. She watched them carry out the ceremonial tapestries, the formal dining furniture, the silver serving set that Kalira polished every week and displayed as evidence of prosperity they had not possessed in 5 years. The illusion was being dismantled in broad daylight, piece by piece, or while the family that had maintained it stood on the pack-house steps and watched it go. Freya looked down at her inkless pen. She thought about picking up the ledger and doing the numbers again, looking for some arrangement she had missed, some creative ordering of the debt that bought another season. She had done this calculation 37 times in the past 2 years. She knew every number by heart. There was no arrangement she had not found. She set the ledger aside. She sat in the silence of the stone kennel and did something she almost never permitted herself to do. She thought about what she wanted, not what the family needed, not what the accounts required, not what her mother would ask for next. What she, Freya Ashbourne, actually wanted. She wanted to read the territorial scrolls in the Wolf Council's Northern Archive, the ones that had not been made available to Southern packs in 40 years. She wanted to argue with someone who pushed back without flinching. She wanted to stand under a moon that looked different from the place she was standing right now. She wanted to hear her own name in a voice that meant something by it. She sat with those wants for a moment. The first time in years, she had given them space to exist. Then she heard wolves approaching at speed on the North Road. 3 hours north of Ironvale territory, Elian Wolfmere was riding hard. His second, Cale Silvermere, had kept pace beside him without speaking. He had learned years ago that the Alpha King was not interested in conversation when his jaw held that particular set. The horses pushed through the morning forest, the cold air sharp and clean, the pack-house falling further behind with every mile. Kyle handed him the scroll without comment. The pack herald seal was already broken. The announcement had been distributed to every rider on the road. Elian read it. He read it completely. He folded it. He held it for a moment with the particular stillness of someone who has just finished reading something and needs a moment before they are ready to do anything else. He read the phrase, "puppet master," without conscience. He thought about a she-wolf sitting cross-legged on a stone floor surrounded by territorial maps, arguing with herself about an 80-year-old treaty error while everyone else danced. He thought about the ink marks on her right hand. He thought about the letter where she had described the blood moon. He thought about 23 years of a mind that had been running a family from the shadows and signing the results with someone else's name. He thought about the way Darkbriar had written about her, with enjoyment. The specific pleasure of a wolf who had found something private and sharp, and used it as entertainment for 7 territories. He sat on his horse in the middle of the road, and was very still for a long moment while the wind moved through the trees around him. Then, "We are going back." Kyle looked at him. "My king, we are going back," Elian said again, the same volume, final. He turned his horse around. He rode south through the afternoon and into the night, pushing pace, not stopping, his wolf's instincts already ahead of his reasoning, already certain in the way that reasoning is always trying to catch up to. But in the border kennel, in the dark, Freya heard a horse arriving at speed from the south road. She did not go to the window. She assumed it was another creditor. She picked up her pen out of habit and remembered again that it had no ink. She set it down. Heavy footsteps on the stone path. Deliberate. Unhurried. Not the footsteps of someone completing an errand. The footsteps of someone who had decided something. The kennel door opened. He had gone to the pack-house first. He had not knocked. He had walked through the main door the way he walked into every pack territory, with the quiet authority of a man who had never needed permission to enter a room and was not about to require it now. Kalira appeared in the front hall. To her credit, she composed herself in under a second. He did not give her time to perform. "The Ashbourne debts," he said. "All of them. I want the total." Her expression shifted through 3 things before she landed on careful. "My king, I'm not certain every debt, every merchant, every fee, every outstanding obligation. Your eldest daughter kept the accounts. The ledger is in the archive room, third shelf from the door. I need the number." He went and found the ledger himself. He knew where it was. He had been paying attention for 3 weeks. He paid every debt before the hour was out. He did not do it to be generous. He was not performing a gesture. Or he did it because what came next needed to happen without the weight of the Ashbourne family's desperation pressing down on it like a stone. Then he walked to the eastern border kennel. The door opened, and Freya did not look up immediately. She expected another instruction, another creditor, another consequence arriving in a different shape. When she did look up and saw who was standing in the doorway, she looked back down. "The debts are cleared," Elian said. He stepped inside and looked around the space with the expression of a man doing a precise and unhappy inventory of what he was seeing. All of them. "You did not have to do that." "I know." A long silence. Wind through the narrow window, the distant sound of the pack house, quieter now without the creditors. "Why are you here?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She had years of practice at steady. "You said the courtship was ended, or you were riding north. I read what Darkbriar wrote about you. He was not wrong," she said. "I deceived you. He called you a puppet master without conscience." Elian moved further into the room and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up. "He wrote about you the way wolves write about prey, with enjoyment." She said nothing. "He was wrong," Elian said. Another silence. She looked at her hands, the ink that had come back, even here, or from force of habit, and a pen she had picked up without thinking. "Why did you come back?" she asked again. Her voice was quieter now. "What is it you actually want?" He looked at her for a moment. Not with the formal assessment of a king conducting a territorial evaluation, with something more direct. "I spent 4 years looking for a mind that matched mine," he said, "whilst I sat in 50 council chambers and ate at 100 formal tables and walked through 7 territories full of wolves who said the right things in the right order and meant almost none of it. And then I found one she-wolf, alone in a records room, arguing with herself about an 80-year-old geographic error." He paused. "I am a selfish wolf. I will not pretend otherwise. I came back because I am not finished." Freya looked at him. The last, no careful defense in her face, the practiced blankness of a woman who had learned to want things very quietly so no one would have occasion to take them away, wavered. "They will say you were tricked," she said. "The Herald's announcement is in every territory. They will say a shadow wolf deceived the Alpha King into choosing her. Let them say it. It will follow you. Your council will use it. My council uses everything. That is what councils are for." His voice was even. "Yet I am richer than Darkbriar and twice as patient. If I decide to bond with the she-wolf who identified an 80-year geographic error in the Frostvale Treaty while eating an apple, that is a decision I am capable of making." She almost smiled, just at the corner of her mouth. Not quite. "There are conditions," she said. Something shifted in his expression, the slight, genuine warmth of a man who has received exactly the answer he expected from exactly the right person. But I expected nothing less. I will not be managed in council rooms. If I see something wrong, I will say so. I will not perform a position I do not hold." "That is not a condition," he said. "That is why I am here." She looked at him for a long time. At the Alpha King of 7 territories, no mask, no formal performing, no great hall behind him to amplify his authority. Just a man who had turned his horse around in the night and ridden back through the dark to a stone kennel on the edge of a crumbling pack's territory. She raised her hand. He took it. His fingers closed around her ink-stained ones with a firmness that was not possessive, that was simply certain. "I will need my books," she said. "I have an entire stronghold full of them," he replied. "Pack what you want to keep. We leave before the moon rises." As they walked out of the kennel, across the stone path toward the pack house to collect what Freya owned, which was not much, mostly books and ledgers, and the private journal she had never shown anyone, Kalira appeared in the pack house doorway. She looked at them, at her eldest daughter's hand held in the Alpha King's, at the particular quality of his posture beside Freya, not ceremonial, not arranged, but settled, the way a wolf stands when it has made a decision and is no longer in the process of making it. Or Kalira opened her mouth. Elien looked at her once. She closed it. Freya did not look at her mother as they walked past. She had said everything that needed to be said in the corridor that morning. What remained did not require her presence. She looked forward, at the dark road north, at the stars beginning to appear in the strip of sky above the tree line, at the wild, unknown shape of a life that had not yet decided what it would be, only that it would finally, genuinely, be hers. It was the most frightening thing she had walked toward in 23 years. She walked toward it without looking back. The northern stronghold did not welcome arrivals with warmth. It rose from the wild moorland at the edge of 7 territories, like something organic. Dark stone and high towers, a landscape of heather and wind and distant forest that had no interest in being beautiful for anyone's benefit. Freya pressed her hand against the cold carriage window and looked at it for a long time. "Most find it severe," Elien said from across the carriage. He was watching her face with the focused attention she was still learning to receive without flinching. "It looks like it does not care what anyone thinks of it," she said. "It just exists, on its own terms." The expression that moved across his face in that moment was not complicated. It was the expression of a man who has just heard the right answer. "Then you are home, Freya." The stronghold staff had been expecting a celebrated beauty, the pearl of a southern territory, polished, ornamental, selected for how she looked in the great hall during council gatherings. What arrived was a quiet she-wolf with permanent ink on her right hand, who asked to see the estate accounts before she had finished her first cup of morning tea. The head housekeeper, Mireia Frostvale, a formidable woman of 50 winters, who had managed the Wolfmere stronghold through 2 Alpha Kings with the authority of someone who had never lost an argument about domestic management, presented the household budget with the barely contained expectation of a woman who intended to establish the natural order of things clearly and early. Freya looked at the supply costs. She asked 3 questions. She identified an overpayment to the Eastern grain merchant that had been running without challenge for 6 years, a modest but consistent error that had cost the estate considerably over time. "This can be corrected this quarter," she said, marking the line with the calm tone of someone who had found errors like this before and knew exactly what to do with them. Mireia stared at her for a long moment. Then she bowed, lower than protocol required. "As you say, art my lady." The stronghold was hers before the week was out. Not because she commanded it, because she understood it, its rhythms, its inefficiencies, the places where good management had calcified into unquestioned habit. She moved through it the same way she had moved through the Ashbourne pack house, except that here, for the first time, the things she fixed were credited to her name. The first months settled into a rhythm unlike anything Freya had experienced before. Every evening, to the great library. Elien at the north end of the long oak table, working through council reform proposals by firelight. Freya at the south end, reorganizing the stronghold's territorial records into a system that could actually be navigated, and editing his arguments with the specific, merciless precision of someone who had been reading his work for months before she ever sat in the same room as him. They argued about wolf lore almost every night, not the polished, nor careful debates of the formal council table, real arguments where both of them pushed and neither of them backed down without being convinced. She found the weaknesses in his reform proposals and said so. He found the gaps in her counter-arguments and pressed on them. Sometimes they reached the same conclusion through completely different roads. Sometimes they did not reach the same conclusion at all and agreed to continue the following evening. It was the most alive Freya had felt at a working desk in her entire life. She submitted 3 reform proposals to the High Wolf Council in the first 4 months, each one addressing a clause in the ancient wolf law that had silenced or excluded she-wolves from the rights afforded by newer provisions. Each one passed. The third one, on inheritance rights, the argument she had first laid out in a letter she had signed with Elena's name, passed by the largest council margin in 6 years. Elder Ulrich sent a formal commendation, addressed to her, with her name on it. She kept it. She did not frame it. She put it in the account ledger next to the column, where she had once written a number she could not solve. It felt right there. But there was a distance she kept, a careful, habitual thing, the last remnant of the she-wolf who had learned very early that assuming warmth was offered freely was how you ended up cold. She called him my king in private. Not in the formal settings, but where council protocol required it and the title belonged. In their evenings, in the library, when it was just the two of them, and the fire and the sound of pens moving across parchment. She kept the formal address like a small railing at the edge of a high balcony, not because she needed it to stand, but because she had not yet fully convinced herself she was allowed to let go of it. He noticed. He always noticed. Or he had been noticing things about her since an archive room in Ironvale territory, and that particular skill had not diminished in proximity. He let it go for a while. He was patient in the way that people are patient when they are certain of the outcome and willing to wait for it. The library, 3 months in. Rain against the stronghold windows, the fire built high. Freya on the rolling ladder at the far end of the room, reaching for a volume of ancient wolf lore on the uppermost shelf, the one covering the original council provisions which she needed for the 6th reform argument she was building. She overreached. The ladder shifted. Not enough to fall, but enough to tip sideways with the specific instability of something that had been carelessly anchored. Careful. He was directly below her. She had not heard him approach. He moved through rooms without announcing himself, which she was theoretically accustomed to, and practically never was. His hands closed around her waist, steadying the ladder and her in one motion, certain and firm and warm through the wool of her dress. She looked down. He was very close. The firelight made shadows across the planes of his face and caught the gold in his dark eyes with the specificity of someone who had excellent taste in lighting. "I can reach it," she said. Her voice was not convincing and she knew it. "But I know you can," he said. He did not move his hands. "You have reorganized the entire Eastern Territorial Archive. You identified 6 errors in the border treaty I have been submitting for 2 years. Last week you argued Elder Ulrich into a position he had never occupied before, and he thanked you for it afterward, which I want you to understand is without precedent in 40 years of council history." She said nothing. Her hands were still on the ladder rail. "What, but you still call me your king when we are alone?" he said. "Why?" The practical answer, the defensive one, was on the surface of her mind immediately. Protocol, propriety, habit. Any of them would have served. She did not use any of them. "Because I am afraid," she said. The words came out before she finished deciding to say them. "That if you look too closely, without the letters between us, without the distance, but without the useful function of managing your estate and reforming your council proposals, you will realize you chose incorrectly, that the mind you found interesting at a distance is ordinary in proximity, that you came back for something and found something lesser. He let out a slow breath. He lifted her down from the ladder, not roughly, deliberately, and set her on the floor. She was standing closer to him than she had stood since the balcony, what with the cold stone wall of the library at her back and the fire lighting everything warm. "You think I made a sentimental decision?" he said quietly. "I think you made a decision in a border kennel in the dark, and sentiment may have played a role. I think," he said, "that you are the cleverest wolf I have ever met, and that cleverness is serving you badly right now." He looked at her steadily. "I did not come back to the kennel because of sentiment, but I came back because Darkbriar described the mind that had kept me awake for 20 nights as a puppet master without conscience, and I understood in that moment that I was going to spend the rest of my life disagreeing with that description in every possible venue available to me. That," she said carefully, "is not the same as love." "No," he agreed. "It is better. It is the beginning of respect. Love built on respect does not collapse when the first difficulty arrives, or it argues with the difficulty and finds a better position." She looked at him for a long time. The careful distance in her face, the practiced, habitual thing she had maintained so long it had become structural, shifted. Not collapsed. Shifted. Like a door that has been locked from the inside, finally recognizing the right key. "Stop calling me your king," he said quietly. "You are not my subject. You are the only person in 7 territories who has ever argued me into a better position. Call me by my name." "Elian," she said. The word felt strange and right in her mouth in equal measure. He kissed her then. Not the performance of a bond ceremony, not the careful, managed press of lips at a formal occasion for 7 territories to witness. A real kiss, the kind that had been building since an archive room in Ironvale territory, since a she-wolf with ink on her hands looked at him like he was an interesting argument she had not finished making yet, or the kind that carries the weight of everything that preceded it and the warmth of everything that might follow. She held on to him with both hands, not tentatively, not at the careful distance of a woman who has learned to want things very quietly. She held on. The fire crackled behind them. The rain continued against the windows without particular interest in what was happening inside. The ancient Wolf Law volume remained on its shelf, unretrieved, but its arguments about inheritance and rights resting undisturbed for one more evening. When she finally pulled back slightly, her forehead rested against his, and the space between them was no longer distance. "I am still keeping my own name on the reform proposals," she said. "I would have it no other way," he said. Spring came to the northern moorlands, slowly and with conviction, green pushing up through the heather, the horizon softening, and the stronghold windows opened for the first time since the deep winter. The wolf messenger arrived on a morning when Elian was at the council table, and Freya was in the library reorganizing the historical boundary records by date rather than territory. The scroll had loopy, familiar handwriting. The seal was Freya's family mark, the one she had grown up stamping on letters she could never sign with her own name. It was addressed to Freya Wolfmere, her new name. Still strange, still wonderful on a page. She broke the seal and read it at the library window, with the morning light coming in warm across her hands. "Dearest Freya, I have been meaning to write for months, and have been too happy to remember to do it, which I think is a good sign. I want you to know, I am mated. His name is Darian Stormbrook. He is a beta from the Valley territories. He is not, as Mother frequently points out, an alpha king. He has large ears that are slightly wrong for his face, and he laughs at his own jokes before he finishes them. He is teaching me to cook. Last week I burned the meat offering at the harvest ceremony, so completely that the ceremony wolf looked at it for a full minute without speaking. Darian ate it anyway, and told me it was the best thing he had ever tasted. I think he meant it. He is like that. Freya, I want you to understand something. I was never going to be what Mother thought I was. I was never the she-wolf who could read territorial maps and argue law in council chambers. I tried for years to feel guilty about that. I don't anymore. Darian thinks I am the most amusing wolf in the valley. Not the most beautiful, though he says that too, but the funniest. That is the first time anyone has loved me for something that was actually mine. I think you knew, somehow, what I needed, even before I did. Thank you for leaving. If you had stayed, I would have spent my whole life wearing a shape that did not fit me. I hope he looks at you the way Darian looks at me, with the specific expression of someone who cannot believe their luck. Your sister, Elena. P.S. I burned another pie yesterday by accident. He ate that one too. I think this is what people mean when they say forever. Freya stood at the window for a long moment after she finished reading. Then she sat down on the window seat, which was the closest horizontal surface, and cried, not the tight, controlled kind she was used to, but the other kind. The relieved kind. The kind that does not carry grief in it, only the release of something that has been held very carefully for a very long time. She was still sitting there when Elian came in from the council table, reading something, his boots loud on the library floor. He stopped when he saw her face. Bad news? She held out the scroll. He took it and read it, standing beside her. She watched his face as he reached the part about the burnt meat offering. The corner of his mouth moved. A tragedy for the ceremony, he said. A triumph, she said. For Elena. He sat beside her on the window seat, close, his shoulder warm against hers, and read the last lines again. Then he folded the scroll and held it loosely in one hand. She says she hopes he looks at you the way Darian looks at her, he said. And she does. With the expression of someone who cannot believe their luck. That is what she wrote. He reached over and took her hand. He turned it over and pressed his lips to her palm, to the ink stains that had been there for years, and would be there, she suspected, for as long as she was the kind of wolf who picked up a pen whenever there was something worth saying. I can tell you, he said, quietly, against her palm, that the description is accurate. She laughed, not the performative laugh she had spent years watching Elena deploy with such success. A real one, surprised out of her by the specific, ordinary warmth of a moment she had not been planning for. Outside the stronghold windows, the moorland stretched enormous and green and wild, indifferent to what the rest of the Seven Territories thought of it. Exactly as it should be. History would remember the scandal. Of the Pack Heralds would archive the gossip for 100 years. The Alpha King who turned away from the beautiful sister, who rode back through the night to a border kennel, who knelt on cold stone for a forgotten daughter, and called it the only decision he was certain of making. They would write it as a story of deception and forgiveness, of politics and impulse, of beauty and its limitations. They would miss the point entirely. The real story was written in quieter places, in the ink stains on Freya Wolfmere's fingers that never fully went away, no matter how many times she washed her hands in the deep stone sinks of the northern stronghold. In the 6 reform proposals passed in the first year, each one carrying the unmistakable logic of a mind that had been arguing with itself in the margins of private journals for 23 years, while waiting for someone to finally hold out a page and say, "Write it here, where it counts," in the way Elder Ulrich was at the Third Council meeting, said something factually incorrect about the border provisions, and received a quiet, precise correction from the far end of the table, and said, after a moment's silence, "Yes, you are right. Thank you, Lady Wolfmere," and meant it, and never made the same error again. In the way the Stronghold staff stopped calling her My Lady in the voice they used for someone they were managing, and started calling her My Lady in the voice they used for someone they respected. But in the way Elian looked at his mate across the long library table on an ordinary evening, in the ordinary firelight, while she was reading something that was making her argue with herself in low murmurs, and had the specific expression of a man who could not believe his luck. In the small carved storage box on Freya's writing desk that held, folded and faded but intact, a letter from her sister about burnt meat pie and a beta wolf with large ears. In the annual correspondence that arrived from Orlena each spring, always slightly singed at the edges, always making Freya laugh in the first paragraph, and make a sound that was almost crying by the last. Elena never did learn to read territorial maps. She became, by most accounts, an excellent cook, eventually. Her household was disorganized and warm, and full of a wolf pup who had chewed 3 corner pieces off the council correspondence table. She and Darian Stormbrook were, and by every report from every wolf who knew them, relentlessly content. The beautiful sister was admired by 7 territories, and then forgotten, as beautiful things often are when the spectacle moves on. But the she-wolf who held the candle in the records room, the one who wrote her soul into letters she could not sign, who balanced the accounts in a house that never credited her, who mouthed the words of an ancient law in a polished serving basin, and was seen by the only wolf worth being seen by. And she was not forgotten. She was remembered in the wolf law itself, in the 6 provisions that now carried her arguments, that gave she-wolves in every territory rights they had been denied for 100 years. She was remembered in the territorial records, reorganized and properly indexed for the first time in 3 generations. She was remembered in the way that matters more than monuments. She changed the shape of the world she lived in. And in the Stronghold library, or in the warm light of an ordinary fire on an ordinary evening, the Alpha King of 7 territories reached across the long oak table and covered her ink-stained hand with his. She did not call him my king. She did not need to. He already knew who he belonged to. In the territorial scrolls of the Wolf Council, locked behind the seal of the Blood Moon Gathering, there is a story the 7 packs agreed never to repeat. Not because it was shameful, because it was true. And the truth, or in the world of wolves, is often the most dangerous thing of all. But sometimes, not often, and never easily, and always at a cost that the people who pay it carry quietly for years. Sometimes the truth is also the most necessary thing. This was that story. Remember it.